Welcome to South Shore Diversity Spotlight. This is where we'll visit people, places, and things of interest, each having its own story, rich in diversity, right under our noses, here, south of Boston. And I'd like to welcome you both to South Shore Diversity Spotlight. This is one of our episodes where we like to profile people, places, and things that are of great interest to those of us here on the South Shore. And we're going to talk about some fascinating work that you're both doing down there in the Plymouth area, which actually has a connection back to Hingham here when we talk about the history of the indigenous peoples of this area here, most specifically the Wampanoag tribe. And with that said, could I ask you, Linda, to introduce yourself?
My name is Linda Coombs, and I am with the Wampanoag tribe of Gayhead Aquinnah, and I am on the board of Plymouth 400 and also the chair of the Wampanoag Advisory Committee to Plymouth 400, and am presently an independent scholar and historian. My background is in museum work.
Thank you. Hello, Michelle.
Hi, Joe.
Tell us about yourself, please.
My name is Michelle Pecoraro, and I'm the executive director for Plymouth 400. We are the organization that was formed back in 2009 to have a fitting commemoration, to plan and actually execute this commemoration of the coming of the Mayflower, the founding of Plymouth Colony, and the relationships and encounters between the Wampanoag people and the English colonists.
Now, the Plymouth 400 had really big plans this year, that is before COVID-19 and the pandemic. How has that affected your work, and what does that look like in terms of your plans going forward?
Well, it certainly has affected every ounce of everything that we've done. What it hasn't affected is the good work that's been done since 2008, 9, 10, and 11, where a lot of the scholarship and a lot of the new work that's been done is now rising to the top. So we're doing more virtual events in 2020 and early 21. Our virtual events actually began about 2 weeks ago with a launch we did, and we have a launch of a exhibit that we've been working on that the Wampanoag Advisory Committee and Smoke Signals has been putting together year over year since 2014. So that'll be a virtual tour of that exhibit. We have a conference coming up, and that will all be virtual, an Indigenous history conference, and Linda will talk more about that. And then we'll have a speaker series throughout the winter. Back in 2021, in April, May, and June, we expect to be able to do some live events, April, May, and June, and that's all on our website.
Well, we certainly look forward to seeing that all come to fruition, certainly next year, with benefit of a vaccine and the like. You mentioned smoke signals. We did an interesting episode with smoke signals a while back that really looked at an extension to some of the work that we had discovered here in Hingham around the history of Tuttleville, which was a settlement dating back to the mid-1700s, involving indigenous peoples of the Wampanoag tribe, as well as free African Americans who had settled in this area as a result of serving in the Revolutionary War. What we found most interesting was that rich connection with the Wampanoag tribe. And so with that in mind, Linda, tell us about your work as an independent scholar and historian as you look to bring to life the narrative of the Native history in the Native voice.
We are organizing the Indigenous History Conference, the title of which is Here It Began, 2020 Hindsight or Foresight. And it has three sort of sections or themes. The first being creation histories and traditional life, because either of those have so many stereotypes, and our creation histories often get, portrayed as myth and legend, things that are not real, fairy tales. So we want to correct that. Our traditional life is seen as us just living in some happenstance, random way, as opposed to living in a purposeful construct, for a particular reason, which was to keep the earth intact. And I might add, it worked until the time of colonization, which is the second theme or focus of the conference. And we have 2 panels on that with at least 10 speakers between the 2 panels, chronologically, how colonization affected from pre-settlement, pre-European settlement to the present day. The conference was originally scheduled for the end of October for 3 days, the 29th, 30th, and 31. And when we learned that we could not do it in person, we divided it into 9 sessions, beginning on October 3rd, and it will be held on weekends through November 22nd. That schedule will go up on the Bridgewater State University and Plymouth 400 websites.
So these are the co-sponsors, Plymouth 400 and Bridgewater State University?
Yeah.
And these are free conferences, is that correct?
Yes.
But it still requires pre-registration?
Yes.
So let's talk about some of the planned sessions. You have 9 sessions. Which ones come to mind that get you really excited?
I would have to say all of them. We have speakers from, each of the New England tribes. We have some non-native scholars that are joining us, and we have native people from other tribes who are asked to speak because of their area of expertise or, the field that they work in, which was, pertinent and relevant to what we're trying to do. I don't know which session it is. It's session 2, which is comprised of 2 panels, a keynote speech and 2 panels on colonization. And I think that there'll be a lot of information in that, regarding the history of this area in New England and Southern New England that people have not heard before.
Let's talk about cultural reclamation. What does that mean? And how does that factor into the work that you're doing, Linda?
When I think of cultural reclamation, my mind immediately goes to material culture reclamation, which is the work that we did at Plymouth Plantation when it was still called that. We literally, since the early 70s, were researching to try to figure out what the Wampanoag people were doing, how we built our houses, how we did our gardens, how we made our clothes, how we cooked, how we made baskets, how we made stone tools, how we made boats, how we did wooden work, how we lived in the environment and the world around us, on the earth around us, all of those things. And by researching the primary sources, which were those sources written by Europeans who actually, saw and talked and spoke with us, interacted with us, and then wrote down their experiences. We use those sources. We use material from other tribes that have a similar material culture, because sometimes the cosmology can differ, or the philosophy. We're going to describe our traditional life and how it was not just a random happenstance thing that happened, a deer ran by, so we were able to have dinner, but rather, our life was built a certain way. It was a purposeful construct for a particular reason.
I like the idea that you've got an educators roundtable so that our local school systems here in our communities, where we know we have evidence of our Indigenous peoples here, are able to sit in, listen, and perhaps take away some of the historical information, incorporating it into their lesson plans.
Yep. The educator, it is sort of a history of education, if you will, because we have one speaker who's going to talk about the early history of European education and how that was imposed on Native people. And Native people did participate in that effort. A couple of the speakers are talking or addressing the need to have Indigenous education, the need to know, number one, to know about this history, and then, how we get it out to other people. And then finally, we have someone who's going to be talking about the fairly new, it's like 10 years old roughly, an organization called the Native American and Indigenous Studies Association to have a focus on Indigenous history and to get it appropriately related, or placed in the docket of American history.
We know that here in our community of Hingham, for example, Black Rock is one of those Indigenous sites that was identified in part of its relationship to Tuttleville, which I had mentioned earlier,
Yep.
in terms of the early settlement of Indigenous people and African American free Africans here in this area. But there are probably others, and we certainly want to keep an eye out as they begin to make their way into our historical gathering.
As I've gone along through the years and just learned how, Indigenous people did construct their cultures and how they related to the land and how the landscape therefore looked in the 17th century, prior to European settlement or at that point in time, is a very different thing from the way the landscape looks today. And that really concerns me. It upsets me because I think a lot of our history and our beliefs just got blown away by development, if you will, because the settlers coming in didn't have the same regard, the same perspectives, the same care for the land, that we did, and saw it rather as a commodity rather than a relation. So it just makes me wonder, the life that our ancestors had and what they did when they were just walking around the earth, and where they chose to make villages or to make houses or to place the cornfields, or, places where they went hunting or got this type of plant. The knowledge that we've lost is vast.
This is really fascinating work that the Plymouth 400 Incorporated is doing here. Do you know if there are other historical organizations in other parts of the country that are engaged in this kind of collaborative work of cultural reclamation at this level?
I think that, Indigenous people everywhere are involved in this type of work. Because I see it all the time, whether it's in the United States or in other countries, whatever Indigenous people, live in whatever place, everyone's having the same type of issues and the same need to preserve their lands, either their homelands or just the land itself, because of the way that we related to it. If it happens that it's a collaboration between Indigenous people and other people, I'm not aware of. I'm sure it happens. I'm just not aware of what those might be.
Well, I certainly think that this work that's going on here with the Plymouth 400, this collaboration, is noteworthy, and it's the kind of discovery that we want to share with our viewers throughout.
Way back when this all began, we did have a board of directors. We did have a Wampanoag board member at that time. And it was very clear to the board that we couldn't move forward with a commemoration where the colonists and the native people were depicted in such ways that it seemed that it was all hunky-dory and friendly. And, I'm sure parts of it were, but the fact is, we don't know that. And what Linda and others of the tribes have learned is that everything wasn't hunky-dory. And so we really wanted Plymouth 400 knew that you couldn't do a commemoration without all of the voices involved being involved. And so I think the board had a lot of foresight, and it really has, put us in this place now where in 2020 and 2021 now, this commemoration, the 400th anniversary of the arrival of Mayflower, really does highlight in many ways the Native history, the Wampanoag history specifically, and the Native history as well. And it brings things to to light for people who have always learned the same thing over and over again throughout school, throughout, you know, society, during Thanksgiving. We all have our notions of what Thanksgiving is about, but now we can really hear both sides of the history and draw conclusions from that.
You know, I was always curious about Thanksgiving, that first Thanksgiving or that second Thanksgiving, and what was actually served at that first Thanksgiving. You know, we've got the big elaborate images of all manner of food lining this long table with the gathering of both our Pilgrims and our Indigenous First Nation Wampanoags. But Linda, do you have a sense for what were the actual foods that were served at that first Thanksgiving?
Well, it's entirely possible that there was turkey, because that was something that was gotten year-round. And we know that when Massasoit arrived with the 90 men, that they later went out and killed 5 deer and returned with them toward the feast. They certainly had corn and pumpkin, and the English, you know, that was their first harvest. So I don't know how, you know, far they'd gotten in developing their recipes, but they used those vegetables differently than we did for the most part. Probably shellfish or fish.
Is there anything else you want to share with us viewers here before we end this visit together?
Just to say that, you know, we have several projects going on, and one of them is the Massachusetts Chronicles, of which Linda is one of the 2 authors. And that book is about the history of Massachusetts, but it's seen through both lenses, through the lens of a British author and the lens of a Wampanoag author. And that book is in every public school in Massachusetts. 35 copies were sent due to a single donor. And so we really have a good basis now for teaching Massachusetts history in public schools in Massachusetts.
Actually, the book had reached a certain point of completion before I was asked to contribute to it. And I ended up contributing so much that was incorporated throughout the book, you know, in different time periods, that they made me a co-author.
I want to thank you, Michelle Pecoraro and Linda Coombs, for visiting with us here on South Shore Spotlight on Diversity.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a blessed week. Stay healthy, stay safe.